Um, Now, with all of that said, I have to tell you, and I know I've been kind of skirting around this, but I just read it once, thanks to one of our fine Stratosphere Lounge people. I have to tell you something. I read this book on RK selection, on the behavioral antecedents and explanations for liberalism and conservatism, and that book opened my eyes in a way that nothing I've ever read ever has. That book to me is like that must have been what Darwin's theory of evolution was for biologists, or what Newton's insights or especially Einstein's insights were for physicists. We had all this stuff that was happening, and things were happening and in predictable ways, but they were happening for reasons we couldn't understand. They were happening so fairly consistently that you could almost predict them, but you wouldn't know why you're predicting them. You just didn't really know until all of a sudden there was a theory, and this theory had tremendous, tremendous explanatory and predictive power. And this RK selection thing, written by anonymous conservative, is simply the most eye-opening theory about politics that I've ever read. I remember just time and time and time and time again, I just stop and look at it and gasp and just say, oh my God. Yeah, okay, that's it. That's why. It's so good. I actually got to the place where I said, some people have criticized it. Now that I've understood the theory, I'm going to read it again, really understand it, and then I'm going to read the criticisms of the theory so I understand what the attacks on the theory are. Maybe the whole thing's been proven to be hooey, but I don't think that's the case, because it is of such predicted value that I'm even no longer that much concerned with the causality. If the correlation is as strong as it is, it's got remarkable explanatory and predictive powers. In other words, you could say that when Newton came along with his laws of gravitation, they didn't explain the cause of gravitation. You needed Einstein for that. You needed Einstein to say that this thing we call gravity is actually the result of bent space-time. That's what causes gravity. And that's why some of the equations at the far extremes of Newtonian physics weren't working out. You can say all of that, and that's obviously true. But the fact is, Newtonian mechanics fits inside a relativity. And relativity may fit inside something else. And certainly will fit inside something else. But that doesn't mean that relativity disproved Newtonian mechanics. On the contrary, it explained why they work. And the point I'm trying to make is whether or not this theory is exactly correct in terms of these Darwinian social strategies and these biochemical explanations and these genetic explanations and these brain structure explanations. Every one of these pathways of proof that this guy has provided seem to make sense to me. There seem to be multiply sourced. The sourcing seems to be credible, and they, as I say earlier, Jennifer, they interlock. This makes sense that these two things would work together makes sense. And if these two things work together, you might expect this to happen, and sure enough, it does. When you get enough of these triangles put together, this matches this, and you got a triangle. Triangle is an extremely rigid shape. And if you don't believe me, by the way, just as a quick aside, take 4 sticks and nail them together into a square, and the square will just do this. It'll be a parallelogram all day. But you make a triangle. I'll tell you what, triangle's rigid. And when you build a structure out of triangles, you get this kind of, oh my gosh, what's the word for that? It's on the tip of my tongue. It'll come to me. But these things are tremendously stable. They make a lot of intellectual sense. And so I would just say, if I ever regretted anything, no. I've never come out of there saying I wish I'd said something, but I do now feel that this is it. Yeah, on the comment stream, Buck, it's the evolutionary psychology behind politics by anonymous conservatives. RK selection. You're going to be hearing an awful, 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 awful lot of RK from this kid from now on. I haven't really run with it yet because I really need to understand it, but I think RK is everything. I'll give you a little tease of something that is originally mine about RK, just real quick as a quick aside. According to this guy's theory, the two basic divisions in political thought, what we today call liberalism and conservatism, are lattice is the word somebody came up with. Cantilever was the word I was looking for, actually. Cantilever construction. The short form here is that there are, according to Anonymous Conservative, that there are different types of strategies that organisms can employ in order to succeed in an environment. And if you want to put the most number of organisms into an environment, which is what nature wants to fill up the void. Organisms will eat. As long as there's food, they'll eat. You'll never see a bacteria stop eating because it'll just make more bacteria. Put a bunch of food down for squirrels or cats or people, they'll keep eating almost all of them until they're so fat they can't eat anymore. So if you look at organisms filling up an environment, there's a formula for this apparently, and the formula has two variables that are of significance to us. One of the variables is R, which is the reproductive rate of the organism, small r. The higher the R, the higher the reproductive rate of each individual. All other things being equal, the more that offspring, that organism will produce more offspring. So the higher the R, the more offspring they produce. And the other part of that equation is kind of on the other end of it, and that's the actual size of the carrying capacity is the term of the environment, and that's represented by K, capital K. So R is the reproductive rate, K is the carrying capacity of the environment. And according to this guy and this book is mind-bogglingly brilliant. What he's basically saying is that there are numbers of organisms, microorganisms, will take one strategy or another depending upon how much resources there are in an environment. So for example, if you just deal with microbes and you've got a large food source, you put microbes in a giant, enormous dish of agar or whatever that growth, basically it's beef broth, they'll reproduce. And if they're in competition with a different set of the same organisms that are using the different strategy, the ones with the highest reproductive rate will win. They'll outbreed and succeed other than the others because the K-type strategy is not based on reproductive rate. It's based on fitness. It's based on relative fitness and the ability to compete. So let me back up a little bit. I'm going to get into it anyway. Every time I talk about it, I understand it a little bit better. If you have an endless field of grass, that is a R environment. Just open meadows filled with grass is an R environment. The Great Plains during America's pre-European history was just open fields of grass that covered a continent. It's more food than you could ever eat. But take an open field of green grass and you put rabbits in there. Rabbits are a very highly R-selected species. The rabbit is designed for R. So what does that mean? Well, that means that if you have two rabbit parents, and one rabbit parent has sex with every rabbit it can find as early as possible, and its children have a very low investment. They're not spending a lot of time on their children. They want the children out of the way as quickly as possible so they can go make more children. And they have sex with everything, and they don't get into fights. They run away from fights because there's all the food they could want. There's no point in competing. Competing is a waste of time. That's really the point about the R society. The R strategy is competing is a waste of time. Fitness is a waste of time. Hard thing to come to grips with, but it's absolutely true. So if you have an R-type species like a rabbit, the faster they can reproduce, the more they're going to fill the environment. K would be something like wolves in the winter. Now, if you've got wolves in the winter, you don't have an endless supply of food. On the contrary, you've got a very limited supply of food in the terms of number of wild animals out there. And so if you're a K species like a wolf, fitness matters. So you have highly competitive mating rituals to determine that only the strongest males get to mate with only the most fit females. You have group competition, but you also have group, because of that, you also have group identity, and you have group cooperation against the larger force, against other wolves, for example. You have a sense of in-group and out-group. So if you had a rabbit out in the open field of green, and all rabbits are R species. Let's say you had a K-type rabbit. So you had a rabbit that decided that it was going to put all of its effort into raising just a few very, very fit individual children, and they were going to mate the fittest, fastest, strongest rabbits they could possibly breed, and that they teach rabbits all the tricks of running from predators and so on and so on and so forth. It would not only not matter, it would fail, because while you're investing all that effort into Super Rabbit, the R-type rabbits are making thousands of rabbits whose genes are going to get passed on. Being fit doesn't help you. It's a waste of time. You should be spending the time as a rabbit that you're trying to make a fit rabbit offspring. You should be spending that time making more rabbits because their food is everywhere. You don't have to compete with other rabbits for food. There's more food than you just walk over and there's some more food, right? There's food everywhere. Likewise, if you've ever if you see new rabbits come into the field, that's not going to be a particularly big problem for you because there's plenty for everybody to eat. There is no in-group, out-group kind of thing, and so on and so on and so on and so on and so on. Anyway, what he's basically postulating is that civilizations that are in ascendance, born out of hardship and scarce resources, because there's very little food for humanity up until very recently, the human beings are extremely competitive. We've had to be competitive to survive. We're a highly K-type species. But if you look at the cycle of civilizations, this is the first thing that rang my bell. This is the first thing that first of many things that rang my bell. I've always wondered about the cycle of civilizations. It's a slow climb over hundreds of years, and then it's an almost immediate decay. And then it's another slow climb, and then immediate decay. And then there's a long flat line of chaos and scarcity. And slowly, you get to the point where the civilization has reached the height of its powers, and that they've done so much trading, that they've got so much wealth, they've got so much food, they're so strong militarily, they don't have any competition at all. And then something happens. So his point is that healthy societies, as we understand healthy societies that are growing, societies that are on the rise, are K-type competitive societies. And K-type creatures not only are bred for competition, they like competition. They need competition. They like it. They like head-to-head competition. They respect the rules because they want to know the outcome of competition, fair competition for fitness. And so what that really means is that human beings are K. They're competitive, fit, cooperative, hardworking. They invest in a fewer number of children and invest a lot in those kids to make sure that the best kids they can be, because they have to be. And then all of a sudden, over enough period of time, those K-type competitors produce so much abundance, they produce so much food and so much security in terms of predation and getting rid of external threats, that the society begins to look like it's got endless, infinite resources. And therefore, the entire culture turns R. And no longer worried about competition. You don't want competition. You don't want capitalism because that's competitive. And if people are in competition, then the fittest will survive. And R-type animals don't want competition because they know they're unfit. They know they're going to lose in a competition. So they give up freedom for security. They give up capitalism for communism or socialism. They start having promiscuous sex with a lot more partners. Children are sexualized at a much earlier age. There'd be thousands and thousands and thousands more R's than K's if it weren't for the one thing that's different this time around, and that's birth control. If there was no birth control, these liberals would have gigantic families. And you see this in inner city populations especially, where food is essentially just delivered by mail, right? Where there is literally nobody working, no incentive to work. You find these women who've got 10 or 11 kids or 7 kids or 6 kids, and one guy's got 9 children with 9 different moms. That's definitive R-type breeding habits. So what happens is we're a K society until we become wealthy and secure, and then the R's take over. And they take over to simply to the degree that it becomes the successful strategy. It's pushing more genes forward. You're having more offspring. Somebody who's on welfare, who has 9 kids because they have nothing else to do. The food comes to them. It may be crappy food, but it's coming to them without having to go out and compete. Has 9 children, puts minimal amount of resources into these children. Are these children fit to compete with other children in terms of what humans know, in terms of their skill sets, in terms of their abilities? Of course they're not. But as long as the food is endless, those genes are going to get passed forward. And that society is successful in terms of Darwinism, in terms of pushing your genetic material forward. It's a smart play. And it just, you touch all this again and again and again. It goes back and forth, and there's so much into the brain chemistry and stuff I'm not going to get into. But one of the things that's the most chilling about this theory is this. This is hard to believe, hard to understand, but it makes sense to me. If you are an R-type individual in a K-type society, in other words, if you are a relatively unfit individual and you know that you don't have a chance really to succeed against competitive groups of warrior-type people, a lot of interesting things happen to you. And I'm going to not speak about individuals now because I don't think people realize this on an individual basis. Think of it as a group. Unfit people who have a psychological aversion to competition because of this R-type behavior have something else in common. According to this book and according to the studies, they found out that conservatives have a much more developed part of the brain called the amygdala. And the amygdala, according to liberals who've also found the same data, the liberals call this the fear center. And they like to say, see, conservatives have a larger, more active fear center in their brain, and that's why they're so irrational and primitive. They're irrational and primitive, and they see danger everywhere that doesn't exist, and they go on and on and on and on and on. And that's why conservatives are driven by fear, and that's why they're so anti-intellectual. Well, it turns out the amygdala is not a fear center, and it is much larger and more activated in conservatives than it is in liberals. But the amygdala is not the fear center. The amygdala is the threat assessment center, which drives fear. What the amygdala does is it provides an unpleasant stimulus to the organism, an unpleasant psychological stimulus. It triggers a sense of fear. But it's not the fear center. It sends the signal to the fear center, but what it does is it analyzes threats. So the example he gives in the book is, if you are walking along one day, minding your own business, and you hear the rustle of grass and a twig snap, and then a cougar jumps on your back, if you survive the experience, your amygdala has processed those two events, has processed the stimulus of the audio of the grass rustling and twig snapping, and the virtually immediate descent of a predator on you. And so the amygdala makes this threat assessment and then basically says to your brain, the next time you hear grass rustling or a twig snap or any kind of sharp sound, you turn around and prepare to fight or flee. You're filled with adrenaline and you turn around. You face the threat. That's learned behavior with a negative psychological stimulus, but it's learned behavior and it saves your lives. And this ability is significantly depressed in liberal brains. So his point is, liberals are not able, they don't have the brainware. It can be developed, it's something you can develop, but they don't have the brainware to perceive threats accurately or reliably. And this is one of the reasons why you see them so often siding with criminals against policemen and siding with their country's enemies against their country. People who take the side of the communists or people who take the side of the Islamicists just naturally gravitate to them because, number one, they are incapable of assessing threats. Now, this is not hardwired. This is the main point. I'm not trying to say people are hardwired this way. Neither is he. He's calling them, I call them, he didn't call them this, I call them psychological attractors. They're like magnets. They're like strange attractors in chaos theory. They tend to pull things towards them. You have tendencies, but they're not insurmountable. Right after 9/11, our society became very K. Large numbers of people had their amygdala severely stimulated on that day, and I was one of them. But I wanted to be a fighter pilot from the beginning. I was always a K kid. And so that threat assessment was a little hard to put away. And for a while, people understood this was a real problem. But over time, Al-Qaeda did the best thing they could have done, which was they left us alone. They remained quiet. So that threat center was then slowly destimulated and went back down to this kind of more prosperity, more safety. It must have just been a bad dream, R. But here's the point I was trying to make about the R. This is the stuff that'll really, really, really freak you out and certainly made me sit up in one of many, many cases. They said if you are a non-competitive type individual, if you've got an R strategy, psychology, you're drawn to that, just emotionally drawn to it. You don't like conflict. The idea of conflict and winning a conflict in terms of capitalism is conflict and warfare and so on. So if you're a communist and a pacifist, these things appeal to you because you don't like conflict. It makes you uncomfortable. You have an understimulated amygdala. So he's saying that's why when somebody draws a picture of a gun, somebody freaks out and calls the cops because they're so understimulated that little things set them off. Here's the part that'll really get to you. One of the best strategies for an R-type, non-competitive individual who does not want to compete because he doesn't think he can because he's not fit enough, one of their strategies is to identify with the enemy, because the direct threat to an American R-type psychology is not Al-Qaeda. They can't assess that threat. Their amygdalas are deficient. What they see is they see successful Americans as their primary threat. And so they have a natural Darwinian philosophy and psychology that makes them sympathize with the enemy because they think that the enemy's warriors can cull and reduce our warriors. That it's the reduction of the domestic warriors that is actually a significant advantage for them. That if we reduce the fit Americans, the unfit Americans, and it's not just physical fitness, it's just survivability. If you reduce the number of fit Americans, the breeding opportunities for unfit Americans goes up. So they sympathize with the enemy because they don't have a good threat assessment area. And it's in their interest. It's in their personal genetic interest to have their warriors cull our warriors. And you can even take that argument to go even further and say they actually have a genetic advantage if an enemy defeats our warriors, because docility and lack of aggression and lack of competitive instincts, the lack of the willingness to fight, means that if an enemy eliminates all of the competitive Americans, the only ones left are the non-competitive Americans who have their heads down and are not fighters anyway. Now all of a sudden they make a perfect subject species, and they're perfectly willing to live in subjugation. They get the resources, they get the women, they get the food, they get whatever. It's called RK, and a couple people have mentioned it. Somebody's got the title, and I'll link to it when I get it a little bit better. But it goes on and on and on, and all of these things tie together. They all make sense to me. They really do. One of the examples he uses in the book, a profound example, I think, extremely illustrative, is the example of cuttlefish. Cuttlefish are actually fairly K-selected species, and when cuttlefish comes time to mate, because they have to be fit, right? They have to escape from predators. The ocean's not a friendly, peaceful place to be. And so when cuttlefish are in mating rituals, what they do is the females are smaller than the males. They have shorter tentacles, and they're duller colors, and the females go down to the seabed, and they find suitable mating areas like crevices and rocks and so on. And up above them, in the waters up above them, the males go through these incredible dominance displays, and these dominant displays are filled with these tremendously highly evolved series of pigmentations, and the strongest and fittest males have the best dominance displays, and they're also bigger and stronger, just like the rest of nature. And so the males will fight it out and do the dominance display, and if the dominance display doesn't intimidate the smaller male, then they'll get into an actual fight, and then the fittest will survive, and the fittest cuttlefish will go down and mate with the female cuttlefish, and the cuttlefish species is kept strong. But, as this guy points out, there is a certain type of unfit, smaller male cuttlefish that on some immediate level understands it can never compete with the other males. It's too small and too weak to compete with the males. So what this male cuttlefish does is he draws his tentacles in, and he assumes a very dull color, and he assumes the shape and color of a female, and he goes right through these warring males who would never let him pass if they recognized him as a male. He goes through these warring males disguised as a female, and he simply goes down to where the females are and mates with them. That's Woody Allen, right? That's Woody Allen and ants. You guys go out and duke it out, and I'll report back to battalion. So, all this stuff actually makes a big species of sense to me. And he talks about the brain. He talks about the brain chemistry, and certain types of child rearing produces certain types of brain chemistries that either lead you towards conservatism or liberalism and so on. He's not saying it's genetic, and I don't think anybody would say it's genetic. I started thinking about this. I said, well, I used to be a lot more liberal when I was in college. Did I change? It's like, no, you saw the Thunderbirds when you were 5. You wanted to be a fighter pilot. You were first in your class. You were highly competitive in your high school in Bermuda, junior high and high school. And the reason you got to be a lot more liberal when you were in college was because you were surrounded by theater people, and you wanted to get the girls, and you wanted to be popular. And everybody there was completely R-selected. There you go. A lot of people say, somebody says you suggest social Darwinism, which is a dead idea for a reason. This idea of people competing for resources is called social Darwinism, but the idea of people multiplying for resources is also social Darwinism. One of the things that's so explanatory about all this stuff, and tell me this doesn't have the ring of truth to it, K-type psychologies are competitive psychologies like wolves and so on. They're fitness related, and so what they want is they want competition and they want rules that determine a fair outcome, because K-type psychologies basically say that, well, if that guy works harder than me, he should be entitled to more money than I do. It just makes sense. R-type people don't see that at all. But K-type psychologies, because they're constantly in competition, since they're constantly kind of in perpetual state of struggle, they have a very, very high regard for rules, and they have a very high regard for in-group structures. And so we have a large respect for law and order and rules on the conservative side of the spectrum. And I don't think liberals do. It's not in their interest to respect the rules. It's in their interest to succeed on their own. And when you look at all of the lawlessness that's going on in Washington now, you look at the president just changing rules at a whim. When you look at Congress just refusing to even acknowledge the existence of the Fourth Amendment or the Second Amendment or the First Amendment, these are the rules. These are the laws. We agree with the laws because K-type psychologists, K-type strategists such as myself, speaking for myself here, I'd rather lose by playing by the rules than win by cheating, because I'm wired that way. I'd rather lose and have played fair. I'd rather lose fairly than cheat by winning. Cheating to win is morally and psychologically repugnant to me. That makes sense among a K-type individual. But an R-type individual, rules are for chumps, which seems to me why this R-type psychology, according to these guys, these liberals, have this rule which says, well, this law is what allowed Teddy Kennedy to make it into the Senate. Well, now Republicans using that law to get into the Senate. No, whoa. That means we have to change the law. Now he's not allowed to get into the Senate this way. Oh, okay. Well, now there's another Democrat who wants to get in, but now the law won't let him. Change the rule back. They do this all the time. They change the rules on eligibility. They change the rules on everything. Voter fraud is just openly mocking of the rules. Somebody here in the comment section says, well, hold on, I thought the liberals are the ones who are making tons of laws. Well, we want to be free. We do want to be free. They're making laws to suppress competition, and then they're individually cheating on the laws. They understand that laws only apply to K-type individuals. They understand that it's part of a K psychology to play by the rules. So, yeah, they play by the rules. Rather, they enforce the rules and then they break them, and that's how it works. And it's another point that this guy brings out that I think is really, really interesting, and that is that R-type animals and R-type cultures and R-type organisms they accept predation, and they'll accept high levels of predation. This is the key, according to this guy, is that the predation has to be indiscriminate predation. In other words, the predation has to basically be non-discriminatory in favor of fitness. In other words, liberals will tolerate a lot of crime, and they tolerate a lot of crime as long as it's not directly aimed at them. Because as it turns out, and again, a lot of this is subconscious, this is this guy's theories, of subconscious survival strategies. If you think about it, if you have a population and there are R's and K's in the population, and the K's will outcompete the R's, it's in the interest of R's to have random predation, because if predators are pulling first a K, then an R, then a K, then an R, well, the R's reproduce faster than the K's do. It's in the R's interest to have non-specific predation. And if you look at R societies like the Soviet Union or China, the mortality rate is astronomical. It's enormous how many people are killed in those societies. We K-type people don't tolerate it because that predation could go against one of our highly invested children. It's not acceptable. So it's all about it's all about general psychological attractors. And here's a little thought experiment that I came up with. It's nice that I can always contribute a penny or two to this giant fortune of ideas. And that's this. Humans, as I said, are a highly K-selected species. And America is an extremely K version of humanity, and conservatives are an extremely K version of Americans. And so those of you who are watching the show are probably about as K as you get. So here's a little thought experiment I came up with because I like thought experiments. What would you do if one day you were suddenly to wake up? Let's say that all of us watching this show right now, how many people are online right this second watching live? At this instant, it looks like there are 200 of us, 202 people. So let's say that all 200 of us K-selected humans woke up tomorrow, and we woke up on the Serengeti Plain in the bodies of gazelles. All right, and we still had our full intellects, and we still had the ability to communicate. We just woke up in the body of gazelles. Now, gazelles are an extremely R-type, herd-type personality or psychology. They're an R-type species. They don't have a lot of investment in their children. They produce as many children as they can. They get rid of them as quickly as they can. And R-type animals, like antelopes or gazelles, would basically say, well, there is predation on us, but it's random. And the basic psychology of the R-type person individually is, yes, there's a lion out there, and yes, that lion is killing gazelles, but I don't have to, the chance of the lion picking me is small. It's 1 in 200 right now, so I got a pretty good chance, number one. Number two, I don't like competition. I'm not going to fight the lion. And number three, frankly, what the R-type individual ultimately says is, I don't have to run faster than the lion. I just have to run faster than Fred, and Fred's got a gammy leg. So as long as I'm faster than the slowest gazelle, I've got very little to worry about. My strategy is, let's just go on eating, and when he comes, we'll run, and as long as I'm not the slowest gazelle in the herd, I should be fine. But if the 200 of us woke up as gazelles, we wouldn't think that way at all, because we are wired to fight. We're built to fight. We don't like threats, and we have a great deal of investment in our children. We mate later, and we want our children to mate later, because if children have sexual activity later, then they're at their prime fitness when they do mate, so they have a better choice for better husband, better wife, and so on. So if 200 of us woke up as gazelles tomorrow morning, I could tell you what would happen. We'd all get together, and we would basically say, who's the strongest 20 of us? Who are the biggest, strongest 20 gazelles with the longest horns? All right, us? Great. We're going to go find where those goddamn lions are, pardon the French, and we're going to go over there, and we're going to gore those bastards until there's none of them left. We're just going to go find out where they are, we're going to track them down, and we're going to kill them. Because there's only 6 of them, and there's 200 of us. And somebody might say, well, you're gazelles, you don't have claws, you can't bring down a lion. My response would be, we don't have to bring down a lion. We just gore them, or we run them off. Well, if you run them off, they run back. Well, if we run them off, then we kill their cubs. We trample their cubs to death. We run them off, we kill the pregnant females, trample their cubs, and pretty soon there won't be any lions. And this business about us all just spreading out on the Serengeti and having grass, those days are over. From now on, we're going to move in a unit, and we're going to have the 30 strongest males on the outside, and we're going to run a convoy over this Serengeti. We're going to put the weakest and the strongest, not just the children, the old ones as well. They're going to go in the middle. Then we're going to have females on the outside of those, and the weaker males outside of those, and the stronger males on the outside of those. And when we see a lion, we're going to all do our little thing, and we're going to send out our distress call, and instead of running away, we are all going to run directly on that lion, and that lion may get 1 or 2 of us, but all we have to do is gore that lion. We don't have to kill the lion. All we have to do is wound him, because if we wound the lion won't be fast enough to catch any of us. And we wound all the lions are gone, and our problem is over. That's what happens when you instantaneously turn gazelles into a K-type species. You give them K-type psychology, and the problem goes away. Same thing with rabbits. There's a field full of rabbits, and we all woke up tomorrow, and there were 200 of us out in the field, and we were all rabbits. And we had our kids out there, and we had all this food out there. We wouldn't just say, hey, all the food we want to, well, they get a couple. These are our people we're talking about. We have in-group loyalties. Our animals don't have this. It just doesn't exist for them. They don't have any loyalty to other groups of individuals who they've had to compete with and as a group against. So if we were 200 rabbits and we found out there were 5 hawks that were taking a rabbit a day, we would simply say, no, those days of us just going off and eating are over. We move together in a group, we stay together in a group, and when the hawk gets hungry enough to come down into the middle of that group, every single one of the big, strong male rabbits is going to jump on that hawk, and we're going to start eating his eyes out, and we're going to start eating the feathers, we're going to start trying to break the wings, we're going to do everything we can. All we have to do is wound the hawk, because we're already fast enough to get away from the hawk 2 times out of 3. We're just going to have to wound them or kill them. And then there's no problem. Then there are no more hawks. That's how K-type psychology in an R-type organism would work. So start asking yourself, what would an R-type psychology do in a K-type organism? What would you do if you were a rabbit? You didn't want conflict. You didn't want competition. You didn't want insecurity. You wanted to mate as frequently as possible, consume all the resources you had, and do as little as possible as you possibly could for it. What would you do? What would that society look like? I'm telling you, this guy's onto something. He's really onto something. I don't know. I think it's the key to understanding everything. I'm going to start doing common sense resistance things with the fist and the wrench, and below that it's going to say R/K, and then below that it's going to say be the K. Be the K. Right? This is the idea. Because when you have, in his term in the book was the groups of K-type individuals who are competitors. When those people come together for a larger group benefit, he calls them warriors. And groups of R's that come together for a larger benefit to the R's, he calls appeasers. And you cannot defeat the warriors. Competitive individuals working together they're unbeatable. So you have to use things against them. And what the R-type psychology appears to be doing to us today is they are using, I've said this before, I've understood this for a long time. I've never understood it before the theory. There's a lot of things I've known about, but I've never understood before this theory. And one of the things I've known about but not understood is, why do liberals, why are they so comfortable with breaking the laws, changing the rules to suit them all the time, and we don't? Why, in other words, why don't we go to Washington right now with muskets and torches and pull these tyrants out of office? Why don't we do it? Why don't we just violently throw Barack Obama out of office? Why? If we're such competitive K-type individuals, why do we put up with it? Why do we know we should, but we don't? Why? It's because he was elected, right? Because he was elected, because he played by the rules, and we would rather lose by the rules than win by cheating. He won. We're stuck with it. Why don't our representatives do more than they do? I don't know. Couldn't we get better people? We should have better people. What happened? Well, we had an election, we lost. And so they are changing the rules and playing our ability and our desire, and not just our desire, our programming to respect the rules against us. And that's what Saul Alinsky said when he said in Rules for Radicals, if you want to beat conservatives, hold them up, make them accountable to their own morality, not to our morality. We don't have any morality. Make them accountable to their own morality. We have morality, and so we play by the rules. Barack Obama won 2 elections, whether he won them fairly or not, I don't know, but we play by the rules. So, man, I'll tell you what, everything I look at nowadays is like, oh, that's an R strategy, that's a K strategy, this is R strategy. It's just, it is. And we have to play by the rules as K-type creatures because these rules are built into our genetic makeup. If we didn't have rules, if wolves, which are a very K species, if wolves didn't have rules, there wouldn't be any wolves left, right? Wolves have rules. They have very strict rules, pack rules. They have rules about who eats first and in what order. And when wolves get into a conflict, when wolves get into a mating ritual, a dominance ritual, they will fight with their teeth. But the instant that one of the wolves has decided he's lost the battle, he shows his throat. And by surrendering, it instantly disarms the superior wolf. It instantly just turns the aggression off. It's just switches it off. It doesn't switch it off 10 minutes later. These wolves are in a dogfight for their lives, and the second that one wolf says, okay, I surrender, you're stronger than I am, the dominant wolf just stops. He just stops. So, I don't know. I'm going to read it again because I want to understand it. I'm going to read the criticisms of it. But it makes perfect sense to me. And this business about identifying with the enemies, about identifying with the enemy because you've got poor threat assessment. You don't see him as a threat because you can't really assess him. The only thing you see as a threat are the people that are in direct competition with you now, rooting for the enemy's warriors to cull our warriors, or to create a society where all of our competitive Americans are gone. Well, we'll live as dhimmis under the Islamist boot, or better red than dead. I never had this thought till just this second. That is the essence of our human psychology. Better red than dead. That's all you need to know. That was the attitude for 50 years among the left here in the country as we were fighting this Cold War against this god-awful evil. Better red than dead. In other words, I'd rather lose my freedom and stay alive, which means freedom doesn't mean much to you. You don't value it the way we do. In other words, what's so wrong with being red, right? Red means we all starve together, or we all get the food pellet together. None of us are better than others. There's no competitive advantage. Better red than dead. A lot of people lost their lives because they kind of thought better dead than red. And this whole idea of living on your feet or dying on your knees, or, I regret that I have one life to give for my country. These are all K-type philosophies. That's a better philosophy. It's more successful. Anyway, isn't that interesting? I've taken 3 questions, and we've been talking for an hour and 39 minutes. I'll go till 8. I've got another 10 minutes.